Hey guys, okay, we're going to finish the Titanic, and I have something to show you, and then we're going to talk about the next book. Okay, so let me finish it up. Showed you all the pictures last time. So we were on chapter 9, which is called Rescue. Once the Carpathia received the Titanic's distress signal, Captain Arthur Henry Rostron went into action. He had the crew gather blankets and prepare hot drinks and soup. The 3 doctors on board each turned a dining room into a hospital. The gangway doors were opened and ropes and ladders were hung to transfer survivors from lifeboats to the ship. So now we're on the ship that saved everybody, the Carpathia. Okay? Well, not everybody, just the people who made it, right? The Carpathia sped as fast as she could in dangerous icy water. Every 15 minutes, the Carpathia fired rockets and cannons in the air to show that they were coming. Around 3:30 a.m., the ship arrived where the Titanic had sunk. People in lifeboats heard Carpathia's cannons before they saw the ship. At 4 o'clock a.m., the first of the Titanic's survivors were brought to safety. Women were lifted on board with sling chairs, while children were lifted up in canvas bags. Men climbed up ladders. For the next 4 hours, the Carpathia took on more than 700 passengers. They were freezing and in shock. Women already on board the Carpathia stood at the railing watching the other lifeboats empty. They were hoping to see husbands, fathers, or children from whom they had been separated. Too often, there was no happy reunion. Some men, mostly from first class, had been in lifeboats. J. Bruce Ismay had been one. I'll show you the picture. That's them coming on board the Carpathia. J. Bruce Ismay had been one of the last to board one. When he reached the deck of the Carpathia, he looked dazed. He could barely speak. Ismay didn't respond to Captain Rostron's questions. Ismay sent a telegram to the White Star Line. Deeply regret to advise you Titanic sank this morning after collision with iceberg, resulting in serious loss of life. Full particulars later. Ismay stayed alone in a stateroom for the rest of the trip. So this must be him. Okay. Oh, here's like a brief, it's an inset, and it's kind of a brief biography, kind of Joseph Bruce Ismay. So let me read that. Joseph Bruce Ismay, 1862 to 1937. Joseph Bruce Ismay was the son of the founder of the White Star Line. After his father died in 1899, Ismay took the company business. It was his idea to build the Titanic as the grandest ship on the sea. Ismay stepped into the last lifeboat that left the Titanic. Many people felt it was cowardly of the head of the company to save himself while so many others died. His reputation would never recover. Ismay spent the rest of his life in seclusion. It is said that no one was allowed to speak of the Titanic in his presence. He died in 1937. So that's him. Okay. By the morning of April 15th in New York, London, and around the world, the terrible news was spreading. Other ships on the North Atlantic had sent messages to land. The information, however, was incomplete or wrong. The Evening Sun reported all saved from Titanic after collision. The New York Times was much closer to the truth. Its headline read, Titanic sinks 4 hours after hitting iceberg. Probably 1,250 perish. Perish means die. A list of survivors was posted outside their offices. 3 days later, on April 18th, the Carpathia slowly steamed into New York City's harbor. A crowd of nearly 30,000 people waited at Cunard Pier. The Carpathia was a Cunard ship. But the ship crept past it and stopped at the nearby White Star Line pier. The onlookers were confused. Why would a Cunard ship go there? Soon it became clear. Each of the Titanic's empty lifeboats were lowered into the water at the White Star Line pier. They were all that was left of the ship. After the Carpathia returned to its own pier around 9 o'clock p.m., the first passengers walked down the gangway. When Ismay left the ship, he was met by 2 United States senators. They had an order for him to appear at an investigation of the disaster the next day. The world wanted to know why this tragedy had happened. Here's a picture. Okay. Chapter 10, The Lost. Over 800 passengers and nearly 700 crew members lost their lives in the Titanic disaster. Most of the passengers who died were from third class, about 540. Among the victims in first or second class, nearly all were men. 54 victims were children. All except one was from third class. Many of the crew had lived in Southampton, England. More than 500 households lost at least one family member. At one school, the teacher asked all the children who had a relative on the Titanic to stand. Every child in the class rose. What happened to the bodies of the dead? 2 days after the disaster, White Star Line sent several ships looking for them. 328 bodies were found. Some of them floated upright in the water, lifted by their life jackets. They looked like they were sleeping. Others were too hard to identify. They were buried at sea. John Jacob Astor IV was identified by the initials inside his collar. His body was covered in soot. It's likely he died when one of the funnels fell over and crushed him. Here's that school classroom they were talking about where everybody had somebody who died. The bodies were taken to Halifax, Canada. Some were claimed by family members. The rest were buried in nearby cemeteries. Hundreds of bodies were never recovered. They were trapped within the ship at the bottom of the sea. Around the world, people remained shocked by the disaster and terrible loss of life. The Titanic was supposed to be unsinkable. How could such a tragedy have happened? The U.S. inquiry found that the crew had not been prepared for an emergency. The Senate blamed the British Board of Trade for having outdated rules about the number of lifeboats that ships were required to carry. They also believed that Captain Smith, perhaps spurred on by J. Bruce Ismay, went too fast in dangerously icy water. The British inquiry did not blame Captain Smith. The Senate stated their recommendations. First, all ships were to have lifeboats for everyone on board. Crew members must be trained on how to lower the lifeboats and properly row them. Ship crews were to have regular lifeboat drills for the passengers. The Senate also recommended that all ships install wireless radios operating 24 hours a day. Not every ship used wireless radios when the Titanic sank. If the Titanic and the Carpathia hadn't both had them, there would have been no rescue. Many more lives would have been lost. This must be the Senate hearing. Okay. In 1914, Canada, the United States, and countries in Western Europe joined together to start the International Ice Patrol. It's called the IIP. The patrol used boats and later planes to locate icebergs in the Atlantic and alert ships in the area. Traveling by ship definitely became safer, but the great age of luxury liners was coming to an end. Why? There was a newer, much faster way to cross the ocean, in an airplane. Chapter 11, Discovery. Shortly after the Titanic sank, people became interested in salvaging or recovering the sunken ship. There were two problems. First, no one knew exactly where the ship had sunk. After Titanic sent its final distress signal, the ship drifted with the ocean currents. The search area was over 100 miles wide. The ocean in this area was 2.5 miles deep. Second, if the ship could be located, how could it be recovered? There was some crazy idea. One was to fill the ship with ping pong balls and float it to the surface. A Denver inventor published a plan to raise the Titanic using a submarine and powerful magnets. By the 1980s, undersea technology had advanced to the point where locating a ship, even one so far below the surface, was possible. Robert Ballard, an American underwater archaeologist, had dreamed of finding the Titanic for years. He figured out what kind of vehicle might be able to locate the Titanic, and he developed a submersible called Argo. Argo was 15 feet long and about 3.5 feet high and wide. It was unmanned, meaning there would be no people inside. Argo was equipped with floodlights, video cameras, and a sonar system. Sonar uses sound waves to locate underwater objects. Once underwater, Argo was controlled by people on the boat above water. Argo could take pictures and send them back to the surface. This is some sort of a newspaper article. And this is the Argo. Well, I think we saw a picture of that, an actual picture earlier. Now I have a little biography about Robert Ballard. Robert Ballard, born 1942, still living as far as when this book was published. Robert Ballard is one of the best-known deep-sea explorers. Born in 1942, Ballard grew up in San Diego, California. From an early age, he was interested in underwater exploration. Ballard worked as an oceanographer for the U.S. Navy. He researched different technologies and developed a robotic vehicle to search for the Titanic underwater. In 1985, he put his invention to the test. Although Ballard has explored many other shipwrecks, he is most well known for his discovery of the Titanic. In 1985, Ballard put together a team to find the wreck of the Titanic. American and French research scientists joined a ship called the Nore, which searched the Atlantic for 6 weeks, but nothing turned up. The team was losing hope. Then, just after midnight on September 1st, 1985, Argo detected something odd. Small chunks of metal located at a depth of 12,500 feet. That's almost 2 miles. On the Nore, the team studied the video screens. These metal chunks looked human-made. Argo continued to send up images. Soon, it located something enormous and circular. Could this be one of the Titanic's boilers? The team quickly checked an old photograph from 1911. This is Ballard. He's the one who found it. And these are the boilers that they think maybe they found one of. It looked exactly the same. They cheered. They had found the Titanic. Ballard and his team were thrilled, but their celebrations took place at the spot where hundreds of people had lost their lives. A memorial service was held for all those who had died. The next day, Ballard sent Argo underwater again. This time, Argo located the bow of the ship. The steel was dark black and covered in rust. It looked like a skeleton of the once grand ship. Argo found the stern lying nearly 2,000 feet away from the bow. This was an important discovery. People hadn't been sure whether the Titanic had sunk in one place or had broken in two. Argo solved that mystery. The Titanic had indeed split in half. Here's a picture of the boiler that is what they found. And this is a picture of the Titanic, what it looked like when they actually found it. People had also believed that the iceberg tore a 300-foot gash in the side of the hull. Seeing the hole showed that that was not so. There was no tears. The rivets had popped open under the pressure of hitting the iceberg. The next summer, Ballard got ready for another trip to the wreck, and he planned to see it for himself. This time he would get into a tiny submarine called Alvin and go over 12,000 feet underwater. Ballard stepped into Alvin with his handheld video camera. It took him 2.5 hours to travel from the surface to the wreck. He would go on 11 dives in total. So what did Ballard discover? Thousands of objects were found lying around the stern. They included portholes, dishes, and even a bathtub. Ballard did not take anything. He thought a gravesite should be left alone. Instead, he and his team left 2 plaques. One was in memory of all who died. The other asked all future explorers to leave the ship in peace. So here's his little Alvin submarine kind of thing. And this is the plaque they left. The plaque didn't stop professional treasure hunters in future explorations. Items from the Titanic were worth a lot of money. Some of the recovered artifacts included jewelry and luggage. A cherub statue from the grand staircase was found. A toy doll's porcelain head was found half buried in the sea floor. Can the Titanic be raised? No. It's too fragile to move. Scientists have discovered that it is slowly being eaten by bacteria. The bacteria have created rusticles, long, icicle-like structures made out of rust. Some experts believe that the wreck will turn into dust within 50 years. There will be nothing left of the Titanic. So this is the cherub from the staircase. The cherub's like an angel. And that's the rusticles. Titanic mania. Even right after the disaster, the world wanted to know every detail about the tragic maiden voyage. Newspapers and magazines printed special editions just days after the ship sank. The first movie about the Titanic came out just 1 month later. It was called Saved from the Titanic. Actress Dorothy Gibson starred in the movie. She had actually been a first-class passenger. In the movie, she wore the same clothes she had worn on the Titanic. A Night to Remember is one of the most popular books written about the disaster. The author, Walter Lord, interviewed over 60 survivors for his account. In 1958, the book was turned into a movie. The movie sets were made from actual Titanic blueprints. The most expensive movie ever made about the disaster was the 1997 film Titanic. It cost $200 million to make. Director James Cameron made a giant model ship. It was nearly the same size as the actual Titanic. The team used a 17 million gallon water tank to film the sinking. The expensive price tag wound up not being a big deal. The movie earned more than $2 billion worldwide. In 2017, workers in China started building a full-size replica of the Titanic, 882.5 feet long. Visitors will be able to eat on the ship and stay overnight. Luckily, there will be no chance of icebergs. The ship will stay docked in a reservoir. So this is a picture from that hit movie that made over $2 billion or whatever, the Titanic. You've probably heard of it. What if? Perhaps the most tragic part of the Titanic story is that it could have been avoided. If only one thing had happened differently that night, there might never have been a disaster. What if the lookouts had seen the iceberg sooner? The calm sea and moonless sky made it difficult to see anything on the water. If there had been waves that night, the lookouts might have spotted them splashing against the 60-foot tall iceberg. If there had been even a little bit of moonlight, it could have helped to point out the iceberg. And what if the lookouts had had their binoculars? They had been locked in a cupboard and nobody on board had the key. Once the iceberg was spotted, Murdoch ordered the ships to turn. But what if the Titanic had hit the iceberg head on? Many think the damage wouldn't have been nearly as bad and the Titanic would have remained afloat. What if the 10-foot high bulkheads between compartments had reached all the way to the very top of deck? That might have contained the water rushing in. Instead, when each compartment filled with water, water immediately began spilling over into the next compartment, just like an ice cube tray. It didn't take very long before all the compartments in the front of the ship were flooded. It shows like kind of a diagram. Like maybe if it had hit it head on, it would have powered through it as opposed to poking holes in the side. Lots of what ifs. The what ifs don't end there. What if Captain Smith had paid closer attention to the ice warnings and ignored Ismay's desire for the ship to keep going at top speed? What if the Titanic radio operator hadn't told the operator of the Californian to shut up? Could the Californian have come to the rescue in time if it had known the Titanic was in distress? Many Titanic passengers reported seeing lights of a nearby ship as they boarded the lifeboats. It looked to be only 5 to 10 miles away, but the captain of the Californian denied this was his ship. He said the Californian was closer to 25 miles away and never saw flares from the Titanic. Most important of all, what if there had been enough lifeboats? The Titanic still would have sunk, but everyone, or nearly everyone, might have been saved. Captain Rostron of the Carpathia wrote, "It hardly bears thinking about that if there had been sufficient boats that night, every soul on board could have been saved, since it was 2.5 hours before she struck, 2.5 hours after she struck that she tilted her massive stern into the heavens and sank by the head, taking with her all that were unprovided for. If only one of these things had not happened differently, the night might not have ended so tragically. Instead, 1,500 lives were lost. More than 100 years later, the sinking of the Titanic remains one of the greatest disasters at sea of all time." That's it. Pretty cool, huh? I mean, good book anyway, not a cool situation. So we have to decide what book we're going to read next. So what I'm going to do is ask you guys, and I'll put it on Seesaw, and I want people to respond to me. What should we read next? Do you want to read Where is the Bermuda Triangle? Do you want to read Who was Mr. Rogers? Or do you want to read Who was Walt Disney? So those are the three choices. I'm going to put it on Seesaw, and everybody vote for one. And whichever one you vote for, we'll read next. We have plenty of books to read, so we just have to decide which one's next. Okay, now I told you I was going to show you something. Let me put Khaleesi to the side. Say hi, Kiki. There's Khaleesi. Let me put her down here. Good girl. Okay, so the next thing that my husband and I are going to be working on is this Lego. Do you see it? It's gigantic, and it's Hogwarts, and it is 6,020 pieces. What do you think of that? I'm pretty excited to start. I don't know how long it's going to take us. That's a lot of pieces, but we're going to try. And so we'll build some, and maybe I'll show you pictures of it as it goes, because I think it's going to be kind of a while before I get it done. Do you see her? Isn't she the cutest thing? Look at that. Oh, I miss you guys. I'm going to go on Seesaw and read some more of your stuff. Please make sure you're checking Seesaw, and I'll see you later. Bye.